Welcome to Walk Talk, the Faith in Motion podcast, where two regular guys talk about their walk with Christ. We're not pastors, we're not priests, just passionate followers of Jesus, here to give an account of the hope that lies within us. We don't shy away from the tough topics or the challenging scriptures. We just share our faith, and we hope that you find it helpful. We're your hosts, Randy Dupree and PJ Verdon. Thanks for joining us today. All right, everybody. So welcome to another episode of Walk Talk. And for those of you who are actually watching the video, you may notice that my brother PJ is not with me today. So I actually have a guest. PJ is actually out there doing the Lord's work of making sure that people in the South have power. For those of you who don't know, he is a lineman. And after the storms that we had about a week or so ago, there's a lot of lines out covered in ice, and he and his crew are out there just making sure that people in the South have power. So he's not able to record this episode with us today. So instead, I have a friend and a guest that's going to join me for this episode, and his name is Michael. So I'll let Michael introduce himself to you all. How's it going, Michael?
It's doing well, yeah. Like you said, BJ's out there doing the Lord's work. I know some people have been without power for over 8 days, especially with the ice storms and everything. So that's definitely a good thing. I'm Michael, born and raised in North County, St. Louis area, but moved around, ended up in the Philippines for 14 years with my wife as missionaries, and came back to the States in 2020. And then I moved back to the St. Louis area to pastor a church. And so glad I met you a few weeks ago, and here we are.
Yeah, so I recently met Michael because Michael and I are both Maxwell Leadership certified team members. And I'm very much trying to connect with people who are part of the Maxwell Leadership team here in St. Louis. For those of you who have never heard of John Maxwell, he is a leadership teacher and coach. Once upon a time, he was a pastor as well. So I'm trying to just connect with as many people as I can who are actually doing what I'm trying to do, which is to be a Maxwell speaker, trainer, coach outside of just the podcast and the book writing and everything else that I do. So I was able to connect with Michael not too long ago. And I thought, you know what? Michael actually has his own podcast. And so since, PJ is out making sure that people have power, I thought it would be good for us to connect. And, before we jump into it, do you want to maybe mention a little bit about your podcast that you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's based off the premise that when I was a missionary, we had this saying with another missionary that was there that you could say anything that was worth saying, you could say in 4 words. So you had to find a way to say everything of importance within 4 words. So it's called the 4 words of transformation, and every podcast is based around these four different words. Obviously, it leads into the character of God, to the heart of God. It's heavily Bible based. But I assume much like this podcast, we also talk a lot about real life and what we go through and the ups and downs. And the thing I wanted to say, it was funny when you and I connected. Because you had put out a post, and I thought you were traveling through. I know I told you this, but
Yeah.
I thought you were traveling, because the way I read it is like, oh, someone's visiting St. Louis, and if I don't get with them like this week, I'm gonna miss it. And I've never responded to one of these, like, because people put in this Maxwell group, anyone here, anyone there. I was like, I've never responded to one, and I saw yours. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna respond. He's probably only in town a couple of days, so I responded, and then we met together, and then lo and behold, we don't even live that far apart. And it's just really cool to see how things come together sometime when I had no idea.
Yeah, 100%. I was hoping to be a little sneaky and let people think that I was just passing through, and hopefully that would generate some
Well, it
urgency.
worked. It worked. First
It
time
worked.
first time
It
I
worked.
responded, and I told my wife, I
Yeah.
was like, I know I don't usually do this, but I just haven't really connected with anyone outside of the conferences. And it's time I connect with someone. And then they're like, oh yeah, I live over here. I was like, oh, that's great.
Yeah. Well, in one of the team calls, the Maxwell Leadership team calls, Chris Robinson mentioned his word for the year. And, John Maxwell's really big on, having a word for the year. And I know a lot of people are. A lot of people, I've heard pastors talk about this, and I've never really been big on it. But when Chris Robinson said what his word was, and he said, if you don't have one, feel free to steal mine. I was like, absolutely, I'm going to steal yours because I think it's a good one. And his word was connect. And so I really made that my focus so far this year, is just trying to connect with as many people as possible. Networking, part of it is because I've started my own business. Part of it is because of this podcast. And part of it is because I joined the Maxwell Leadership team. So I've really tried to, at least the first month of the year, live out that word as much as possible and connect. And to be honest with you, that's a stretch for me because I am an introvert by nature. And I'm fine just sitting in my basement playing video games and listening to podcasts all day. So it's definitely a stretch for me.
Well, I'm gonna say that God brought us together because you don't usually do that. I don't usually do that, and here we are a few weeks later.
That's right. Here we are. So, just to give everyone a little bit of background, so both of us are Maxwell Leadership team members, and I just want to give the people who might be listening a little bit of more background about John Maxwell. So, Maxwell basically talks about leadership as influence. So he really focuses on leadership as influence. He says that leaders have to be able to see further down the road than everybody else. He says that leaders have to have integrity. They have to walk the talk. Leaders have to develop other leaders, and that's kind of one of the key characteristics of leadership from John Maxwell's perspective, is that leaders are developing other leaders. And I could tell you, from my experience, and I've studied lots of different leadership teachers throughout the years, and John Maxwell has always been one of my favorite. And one of the things that I've gravitated towards him, one of the reasons why was because I do think that he's very biblical in his approach, and he defines leadership in a very biblical way. There's other great leadership teachers that I've learned from, like Jim Collins and Stephen Covey, and even Marines like Jocko Willink, are all they all have a lot to teach when it comes to leadership. But for me personally, it's really the biblical foundation that I see in his teachings that kind of drew me to John Maxwell's books and to joining his team. But for you, I'm sure it's probably similar. But what about you, Michael? What drew you to John Maxwell? What made you want to become a certified team member? Because that's no easy task. There's a price to it, monetarily. There's a time commitment, right? It's a lot of work just to become a member. What drew you to Maxwell and to the team?
Well, I'm gonna be honest. One thing that really drew me and kind of pushed me over to make the leap, so to speak, was I was seeking some type of credibility. So in the Philippines, 14 years, God uses. We're able to do some awesome things. With an orphanage, it's still going today. To church planting, to being in a school, to businesses ministry. But in 2020, when I left the Philippines, it was almost like I woke up from a dream. I mean, after being there 14 years, I was here in the States now, and really, I didn't know very many people. There are people who support us who live all throughout the country, but they didn't, live where I live necessarily. And I found myself kind of really feeling like I'm back at ground zero. And so I have to me, I have these 14 years of leadership experience, in a third world country, and all the stuff that comes with that, all the awesome, cultural differences and everything that you sort through. And then missionaries came from all different countries too. So it wasn't just the US and Philippines, it was all different countries. We had lots of cultural differences and different understandings. And but I had all that leadership experience, but I didn't have any credibility for people who didn't know me, and so it was really, I was trying to find something that I felt would kind of give a credibility to who I already am, who God's called me to be, who I've kind of already refined into, and I just needed something that was kind of a platform. And I find a lot of places you go, you talk about John Maxwell. Not everybody, but a lot of people have heard of him. They may or may not have read his stuff, but they've
Yeah.
definitely heard of him. And you'll go some places where as soon as you say Maxwell, like, oh, really? So it just depends. And God can open any door; He's going to open and close any door He's going to close. So I never tried to force His hand, but as a steward, just trying to be ready. That was one of the things that really drew it to me, was trying to get something behind, a name behind the experience that I have.
Yeah, yeah, you're right about that. I think, a lot of people have heard of John Maxwell. There's a lot that haven't heard of him, but a lot of people have. And, he's written, I think, somewhere near like 100 books over the last 50 something years. So anyone who is in a leadership or management role that I've talked to has almost, undoubtedly heard of John Maxwell and read one of his books because he's been putting out books for so long. So, yeah, he's definitely been around. And I think, I've heard him say a few times that it's just, one of the things that happens when you just live long enough is he's outlived most of the other people that he came up with and most of the other people that he learned from. But one of the things that, outside of the biblical, um, leadership principles that drew me to him is the fact that, for John Maxwell, he kind of really embeds growth into his leadership. Like he really intertwines leadership and growth. And I'm going to admit to the world here that, I know for me, there's been long periods of my life where I was not growing like at all. And it really wasn't until I became a Maxwell team member and started learning more about growth that I started to, God started to open my eyes as to why. And it was because I was making one of the very first and easiest mistakes, which was thinking that growth was something that just would happen naturally, without being intentional about it, without making a decision. But and when I look back on my life at the times where I was either at my lowest or the times where I just what things were just stagnant, and that's exactly what was going on. I was just assuming that if I just continued to be a Christian for another year, I would grow in my faith, and instead, what was happening is I was very stagnant or even going backwards at times because to a certain degree if you're not moving forward you are moving backwards, right? So for me that growth being embedded in there was definitely something that stood out.
Yeah, that's one of the Maxwell phrases. Change is inevitable, growth is optional. And I
Yeah.
liked it so much at the conference, I got the mug. Change is inevitable, growth is optional. And I bring this when I go to church if I'm going to preach. I bring this whenever I go to work because I work also. I'm co-vocational, so I work full time. I brought this to a men's Bible study this morning, and it's true. You're right because if we aren't moving forward, there's really nothing alive that genuinely just stops, right? It's either growing in life or, like you said, it's decaying and dying. And there's been
Yeah.
plenty of time. And actually, that was the second point I had for this, first thing we're talking about is that I do want to be a lifelong learner, and I felt like I had also kind of stalled out in my learning. And so, joining the Maxwell team also, of course, you get a whole platform. You get more than you could probably sort through in 5 years, and it's just a lot, right? So
Yeah.
it just really opened up the doors to learning. And one thing I think is really important for me, I was raised in the church, right? Different churches, few different denominations, but the church. And I found out in my adult life that I really also have to be willing to unlearn. I have to be willing to unlearn things that I learned wrong or, well-meaning or not, just aren't factual. They aren't truth. And so that's been a big part of my journey, probably over the past 3 or 4 years, even before I joined Maxwell, was learning how to unlearn things that need to be unlearned so that I can learn things that need to be learned. And that's a big part of growth too. As if you Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ is saying yesterday, today, and forevermore. But the closer I get to him, I'm still changing. I'm still transforming. My mind is still being renewed. So he doesn't change, but I should. I should change. I should grow as I go to be more like him as I grow in my leadership in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something that's kind of a theme that my brother and I, that PJ and I talk about quite a bit is that, we feel like you that we've had to unlearn a lot, just because as we've continued to grow and, better understand, the love that God has for us, we feel like not everything that we're learning today aligns with what we were taught in the past. And so definitely could relate to what you said about having to, maybe unlearn some things. So thanks for bringing that up. Let me ask you the next question that I had on my mind here, and I'll let you go first this time. Why do you think leadership is so important? So obviously we think it's important, right? You mentioned that you want it to become certified to kind of have a little bit more, of kind of like a credibility for the people who didn't know you. Why does that even matter? Why is leadership so important from your perspective, Michael?
Yeah. So I might take a little bit of a long way to answer this if that's all right, but you can
Yeah.
interject at any time. It's funny because I do pastor a church now, but I'm not always. And as a missionary, I used to think I'm not going to pastor at all, and then God brought me here, which is just His sense of humor, right? But I always tell my church, and anyone I talk to, that the days of Moses are done. Like the thing, I'm not the one to go up on the mountaintop and hear from God for you and bring that news back down to you and say, here's what God's saying for you.
Mm,
Like those days are done, right? That's why Jesus
right.
came, personal relationship were together. So I don't think of leadership as authoritarian, but you said it earlier, leadership is influence. And so I think the reason that leadership is really important is because we have to be able to recognize the patterns that are happening around us, patterns in what God is doing, patterns in the society around us, patterns in political, whatever you want, the patterns that are all around us. We have to be able to recognize them and to help lead them. And my philosophy, and I you'll hear me say this more than once if we get to know each other better, is that everyone who is a follower of Christ is a leader. And I, for so long, because I was raised in the church, I saw so many people that after 20 or 30 years, they still wouldn't feel comfortable bringing someone else to the faith. And I'm like, that those days are gone. They're done.
Yeah.
We're here now, and it's up to us to have a relationship. And if the very least, if I am a follower of Christ, I am called to lead people to Him at the very least, right? So I think leadership is really important. I think it's Maxwell say everything rises and falls on leadership.
I love that quote. I love that
Yeah,
quote. That's so important that he says that everything does rise and fall on leadership.
yeah, yeah, and I do think it's true, but we just have to recognize the patterns around us. And last thing I'll say about this, an example that always sticks in my mind, always, if you go back if anyone's listening here, you can go just read through the story of Moses as he's leading Israel. And there's one time where God tells him to strike the rock and water will come out for the people. And he does. And they go a little bit further. And then this time God says, speak to the rock and water will come out. But he doesn't. For some reason, he grabs that staff and he strikes the rock, even though God told him this time to speak to it. And when we talk about leadership, we talk about the patterns, we talk about the dynamic relationship with God. I'm always aware and challenging myself, like what is happening today? What is God saying today? Or even if I'm looking at patterns in society, what's happening right now? And the thing that got me to where I am today is not going to be the exact same thing that's going to get me to where I need to be tomorrow. And those are the adjustments that leaders have to make.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I love that quote so much because I could think in my mind about times when I suffered personally from poor leadership, right? From whether it was a parent who was making bad decisions that have affected me and my siblings, or a boss at work that didn't know what they were doing. Everything does rise and fall in leadership, and good leadership empowers people and enables people, and
Yes.
it's a multiplier when you have good leadership, right? And I think that's why Maxwell is correct when he talks about leaders having to be able to see down the road and have that vision. One of my favorite verses, I'm sure you're probably familiar with it. In Proverbs 29:18, it says, "Where there is no vision, the people cast off restraint." The people perish for lack of vision, right? So leaders being able to see down the road and have a vision for where we're going is so important. And that vision needs to be, it needs to come from a servant's heart, and care for people. It can't be a self-serving vision. The self-serving visions are the visions of like cult leaders, right? Like the Jim Joneses of the world who, seek to serve themselves, and then all of their people perish, right? Because the vision that they did have was very self-serving. But true biblical, leadership is all about, how do we serve other people as we're serving the Lord? And it starts with having that vision.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that I love that verse. And it's when we're talking to people who are kind of stuck in the place of life or maybe making a lot of choices where they're casting off restraint, so to speak. They're just giving into the fleshly desires every day, whatever that may be for them. It's really, like you said, it's really because if I don't have a vision of something that I'm working toward, or a vision God's placed in my heart, something that I'm giving my best for every day, then why would I? Like why would I rob myself of the things I desire if I thought that there was nothing out there and something beyond today, right? There's no
Yeah.
reason to. So you talk about vision, I love it. And I love that so many times we're invited to partner in with the vision of what God's doing, which many times is going to be something that is going to be some that we won't see fulfilled in our lifetime. How
Yeah.
many things are going on around us that we can participate in that we may or may not see fulfilled in our lifetime, but it's still a great vision, and we're still called to partner with it and to be a part of it.
Yeah, 100%. I forget the quote about old men planting trees that the shade of which
Yeah,
they'll never sit under. But when you said that, that's the quote that came to mind. Is you're right. Sometimes we're going to be starting something like Moses with Joshua, right? He started the Exodus, but Joshua was the one who came and executed on Moses's vision.
Hmm.
And one thing, and I'm glad that I'm talking to a pastor here because I do have a heart for pastors in this because another thing that Maxwell talks about is how leaders are the lid and that leaders fail before the people do. And I do think that it's very important for anyone who considers themselves a teacher or a pastor in the church to make sure that they are constantly growing themselves and that they are not the lid. I love how you said that, we're not in those days of the old covenant of Moses where you're coming down with the message from Sinai that, God is he's within us. He is speaking to our hearts, to every single one of us. But for our congregations to grow in their walk with the Lord, I think it starts with the leaders in the church who have to continue to grow in their walk with the Lord because you can't teach someone something that you don't know yourself. You can't lead someone to a place you haven't been to yourself. And if you have stopped growing, then you become the lid and everyone else will stop growing too.
Yeah, and as that pastor, as a leader, I do feel it's my responsibility to be connected to God and to see or hear or feel, however He speaks to me, the patterns of what's going on and where He's leading me, where He's leading us, in that vein. So there's definitely I'm not abdicating the responsibility of the role, but if I do a good job, I'm leading people to Him, and they're going to come to me on a Sunday and be like, "Man, I was in Psalms this week, and I never understood this chapter before, but God already spoke to me, and here's what He said." If I'm doing a good job, that's the kind of stuff that's happening on a weekly
Yeah.
basis. If I'm not, then they're going to just talk about what I said, and
Right.
yeah, that's not what I want.
Well, and Maxwell talks about how one of the roles of the leader is to grow other leaders. And I think if you look at Jesus, Jesus was the best example in my mind of this, is how he grew other leaders because every one of his disciples, minus Judas, right? They became leaders in their own right, who then had other leaders that they grew. So I could tell you as a manager in the corporate world that I did not have to be the expert in the work that my team did. I just needed to trust my team and I needed to empower them to be the leaders that they needed to be in whatever the job was that they were doing. If my team was supporting a program that I wasn't familiar with, I did not need to be the expert in that program. I needed to trust them to be the expert and I needed to trust them to raise their hand when they needed help. That's how I was trying to grow my team to become the leaders that they needed to be, not by micromanaging them or trying to always be right, right? But it might be a little different in the church. There might be some pastors out there who feel like they should have the answers all the time. But I love your humility, how you are basically saying like, yeah, I mean, sometimes they're shown things that I'm assuming might be enlightening for you as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm not one of them. I'm not. I know exactly what you're saying, and I have other friends who pastor, and there are many times where well intentioned they'll think that they need to be kind of in the middle of everything or on top of everything. And my philosophy is no. Like I'm kind of with you. If someone else is, if their gift is, well, it's the gifts, right? If their gift is service, let them serve. If their gift is teaching, let them teach. And I don't have to be the best. I don't have to be the best preacher in the church. I don't care. I don't have to be the best worship leader. I don't care. I don't. It doesn't. If we're all expressing the gifts that God has given us, how much better is that? That the weight of the world is not on my shoulders each and every day. I mean, I still feel a lot of it, just even though I have that ability to let go, I still feel a lot of it. So for the ones who hang on to everything and have to be in the middle of everything, I don't know how you do it.
Yeah.
It's hard, but
Yeah.
I'm with you. That's my philosophy too.
You turn into Moses before he appointed the judges, right? Where you're like
Yeah.
doing too much and you need someone to come and tell you, "Hey, you can't keep this up. You gotta appoint someone else to help you out and take some of the load," right?
Yep. Good old Jethro, the deacon. Probably the deacon.
Yep, yep. So let's move on to the next question. So I did want to ask you, what is your favorite Bible verse regarding leadership? I got quite a few myself, but I'm really interested in what is your favorite verse or verses if there's multiple regarding leadership.
Yeah, I got two, but I'll just start with one, and then you can go, and then we'll see where we want to go from there. But it's the one I told you when we got together. It's Ezra 7:10. And
Mm,
and the New King James says, "For Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach statutes and ordinances in Israel." So the principle is learn, apply, teach. He sought it, he did it, he applied it, and then he taught it to others. And the thing I see not just the Christian world, but the secular world, however you want to say it, the marketplace, everywhere. You see it so many times where people are so quick to try and learn something and teach it, learn it and teach it,
Mm,
and they don't have that buffer of applying it to my life, applying the principles to me. And if I don't, like you said, if I haven't filled myself up with this, how can I spill over and fill up others? And it's a
yeah,
lot of times it's because we live in a microwave society and we want things yesterday. And so and even in the churches, when a new trend comes or a new fad or, something that's, oh, we got to do it now, and the truth is, there's been no application. There's been no, like, how is this settled in my heart? Is there peace in my heart with this or not? And so learn, apply, teach is the principle for me. And, Ezra 7:10, there's different versions have a little bit of a cleaner version of it, but I didn't want cherry pick versions. So I use King James. So I just stayed there.
gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, no, that's a great verse. Whenever you shared that with me, it really stood out to me. I'm horrible at remembering references. I'm lucky if I can remember the book that it comes from, but I love that approach. And like we discussed, I think that there's a lot more value when you're teaching if you've done the doing after the learning, right? Because yeah, I mean, in our society today, where people may go to college till they're 30 or older, just getting masters and doctorate degrees, and not really taking any time to practice it in between. They may walk out with the desire or even the ability to get into a high position that they might not be fully qualified for, because they just don't have the real life experience of actually applying the things that they learn. And I think it's a lot more valuable to, and even as part of the Maxwell team, that's one of the principles that they tell us, right? Is they're like, learn a little, do a little,
Hmm.
learn a little, do a little, and
Absolutely.
and they want us to keep repeating that before we just you try to soak it all up and learn everything all at once and then go do. And it is a lot more effective if we kind of go through those cycles, learning then doing, and then teaching.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
Yeah,
a great verse.
live is just the energy. When something clicks, you hear something that's, oh, that's it. You have an energy with you, and you're just like, I gotta tell others, I gotta tell others, I gotta tell others. But you're right about what you said. With experience, and I was telling you that in HR, I get applications, and there will be people who are maybe late 20s, early 30s, no work history at all, educational history a lot, from this degree to that degree, and I'm not putting them down. I don't have any place to sit in that, but I do know that we definitely look for work experience. Like, have you been able to put into practice what you learn? Because until you can put in, practice is the highest form of competence. This is the I have this whole I have a couple of teachings on this. So I'll get off my high horse here real quick, but practice, when you put something into practice, it is the highest form of competence. It shows that you know how to do it. Think of a basketball team. They should practice at 110% so they can play a little bit easier than that, and so, just having that experience and that ability to apply it, which for some people, despise not thy youth. I understand that 100%. But just looking for that people who are willing to apply in their own lives before they go and tell others this is what you should do.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, I know for me personally, everybody learns different, but the way I learn best is by trying things out. I learn a little bit, and I'm 10% of it may stick, but it's not until actually I go and try it and do it that then when I go back and learn it again, everything makes sense. And I have a lot more questions, and everything that I was learning before that maybe just kind of, went over my head. Now I actually could absorb it, and I really could learn it. So, and I know there's a lot of people like that, learn a lot more by doing. So I think that's a great verse. One of my favorite verses, it's really where Jesus talks about becoming a servant. So in Mark 10:43 through 45, he says, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all, for even the Son of Man did not come to serve, but to, or I'm sorry, to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So that's my favorite, I would say, out of all of them. I have a few other ones, but the reason why I picked that one is because I think underlying a lot of the leadership teaching and a lot of the leadership books that I've read has kind of been this servant leadership mentality. I mean, there's literally a book called The Servants, right? And it's based on biblical principles, mostly on the servant, uh, the servant leadership that Jesus demonstrated. And I think that really that kind of sums it up to me to be a good biblical leader, you have to be a servant. You have to be a servant, and you have to care, enough to serve people, because I think that it's almost impossible to be a servant if you don't care about the people that you're serving. And so for me, that's my favorite one.
Yeah, and again, this is I love it, and it's a difference between influence and authority. And so many people think that being a leader is about authority. It's about, and it's not. It's about influence. And I've been in a situation which was terrible, where it was a marked day to celebrate a leader in our midst. And the truth is, there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on that was not pleasant, and a lot of people didn't like this leader. This leader didn't like a lot of people. They were, and I don't. I'm the chill guy, and I try to live at peace. So I'm not willing to fight on, or I'm sorry, I'm not willing to die on many hills. And this was the type of leader who did. And walking into that party, knowing that there was absolutely zero enthusiasm for people to be there, it was hard, and it's like a memory that stuck with me. You talk about leaders. You can tell when someone walks into a room and they're loved and appreciated, and like you could tell that they really invest in others, and it's not surface, it's not authoritarian. It's genuine love, for lack of a better term. It's from that influence, it's from that serving, it's from being together. And we yeah, to think about Jesus coming down to earth, it really, I don't know if we can fully comprehend the humility and what it took for him to do that. I don't
Yeah.
know if we can fully comprehend it, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it seems nearly impossible to comprehend how God could step down and become a man, and and serve the way that he did. But I think that's ultimately just shows how much he cares for us. And when I was a senior manager on a team a few years ago, and my leader told me when I took the job under him, he told me, above everything else, he said, just make sure that the team knows that you care. And I thought about that, and I was like, "Oh, wouldn't I want them to, like, win? I want the team to win. I want them to feel good at the end of the day, like they accomplished something, like we did something great. We moved the metrics for the company. We got some wins under our belt." But he said, from his perspective, he wanted me to make sure that the team knew that I cared. And the more I started thinking about it, and I started reflecting on that, a lot of the books that I've read, like Good to Great by Jim Collins. Like he talks about servant leadership, and a level 5 leader is really that person. And I think at the heart of it is that caring. And I think Jesus really demonstrated that to us, not only by putting on human flesh and dying for us, but also, I mean, when he talks about being the good shepherd in John 10:11. He says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. And so, like, obviously, Jesus died for us, right? And that's his ultimate way of showing that he cared. But even when he was here on earth, like, he showed he cared for people by not wanting to stone the woman who was caught in adultery. In John 11:35, it says Jesus wept when Lazarus died. He wept, even knowing that he was going to, resurrect Lazarus, a few minutes later. He still wept for the guy because he cared for not only for Lazarus, but for Lazarus's family who was distraught that he had died, right? So like it's all those little things in my mind that just shows that like Jesus was able to, create such a following, and with no real authority, by the way, right? Because he didn't hold a position in the synagogue. He didn't hold any kind of formal position while he was on this earth. But yet the people, when he spoke, they said he spoke as someone having authority, even though he didn't have any
Yeah.
authority that they knew of, but they could see that he cared. And in my opinion, that's why so many people followed him, more so than anything else, more so than whether or not they really knew what was happening, whether they knew he was the Messiah, or whether they even knew what being the Messiah really meant. I think they really followed him because he saw that he cared and because he was there to serve.
Yeah, yeah, the saying is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you're spot
Absolutely.
spot on with that, and you were blessed to have someone teach you that lesson, at whatever age you were at, because it's a lesson that a lot of people much older than us still haven't learned. And it's hard.
Yeah.
Another one I have is Philippians 2:2-4, which is fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. So that's
Yeah.
servanthood. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. That's a leader. I mean, leadership is not about putting yourself first. I should say, I guess, biblical leadership or godly
Right.
leadership is not about putting yourself first. It's about putting others first. And you're going to find as you do, and as people learn how much you care, and as you build relationships. I'm in a really cool season right now for the past 2 or 3 months. For the first time in my life, God has kind of brought some new people to our church. And for the first time in my life, if there's like a desperate need that needs to be done today, I'm not the one who has to go do it. And this is, I mean, for the first time since I've been in the States, I'm sorry, not when I was in the Philippines, but in the last 4 years when I've been here. And it's just awesome. It's just awesome that it used to be if something needed to be done and there was a family had an emergency, I was the only one who was going to get out and go and do it, right? Because of a lot of different reasons. And I'm in a season now where it's like other people are like, no, I got it, Pastor Mike. I got it. We'll go over there and take care of that and don't worry about it. I'm honestly, I was stunned the first time because I was like, I'm not used to that anymore. And it's hard sometimes because it's hard not to get into the Martha versus the Mary mindset,
Mm,
and
yep.
this is, it, because we do need to work, right? God created us to work, which could be a whole nother podcast. Could probably take a month, content just on that God created us to work. He did. He also created us to rest. And sometimes, the best thing we can do is to let go and to let others, like you said, it's not just me trying to grow, it's other people. So when they do grow and whenever they say, no, we can take care of this, we got it, go ahead. It's just a wonderful thing, and I love it.
Yeah. You mentioned it a couple times, so I gotta go back just a little bit because you mentioned the fact that, it's not all about authority. And I forgot to mention earlier when you said that one of my favorite books by Maxwell is Developing the Leader Within You 2.0, where he talks about the different levels of leadership from his perspective. And he says that leading from authority is the lowest level of leadership. Pretty much no one's following you for any other reason than because you have a position. And I think about that, and I think about, like, even just like leading my kids and my family. Like, if they are listening to me just because I'm like, "Hey, I'm your dad and I said so. Do it because I said so." That's me leading from a position of authority. Versus if you develop yourself and you grow as a leader, you move on to ultimately a place where people follow you just because of who you are and they like what you stand for, right? Like, I mean, John Maxwell, for both of us, we've mentioned him a lot. I've never even met the guy. I've only read a few of his books. I've not even read all of his books. I've not followed him that closely, but I know enough about him to know what he stands for, and I follow him because of who he is, right? And he's at that level, and we're all at different levels in between. But you're absolutely right that it's not about position and authority. If that's why people are following us, if that's the only reason why they're following us, then we're not doing something right. We're not growing as leaders ourselves because we need to get to a point where they're following us because of what we could help them to do, because we're growing them, and ultimately because of who we are and what we stand for.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I got nothing to add to that. That's perfect. I love that.
All right. Well, I got another question for you then. So, what are some biblical figures that give us good examples of biblical leadership in action? So, when you're thinking of biblical leaders in your mind, I mean, we've talked a little bit about Jesus and Moses, and if that's your answer, that's fine. But who comes to mind for you when you're thinking of like, biblical leadership?
Yeah. So you can go so many different ways here, but definitely there's one, and I'll explain a little bit why, but I'm going to say Nehemiah. And,
Mm,
Nehemiah was a strong leader. He turned out to be a strong leader. He just heard of what was going on. And the first thing that happens is his heart breaks with empathy, and he feels the pain of the people. I'm gonna say he feels God's heart and the sorrow that Israel had not rebuilt as they were supposed to. So he grabs a hold of God's heart. He grabs a hold of the people's heart, of the sadness and the sorrow. It literally changes his appearance, because for me, empathy is huge. And
yes.
it sympathy is okay. It's necessary, I guess, in some cases, but empathy, when we actually join in the sorrow with someone else, weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. That was who I think Nehemiah was. So what I really reason I pick him though is because when he was called upon by the king, like what's wrong, and he had the whole thing, he was able to come up with a plan, and he was able to even to commit that he would come back to the king's service. And I'm telling you, there are so many leaders who their goal is to get to the top, and that's
Mm,
it. I want to
mm.
get to the top of this organization. I want to be the boss, the CEO, whatever it is. I want to get up there, and I want to stay there because that's the position I strive for.
Right.
And it's just there's more to life than that, and I've been there in the one organization I was with for 14 years, started, literally at the bottom. In my last 2 years, I was at the top, and because the founder placed me there, and it's an awesome story we talk about sometime. But a year and a half in, God said, "All right, Mike, it's about time to go." And I was like, "I just got here, right? I just finally got up to the top, right, to the executive director, and a year and a half in, you're gonna call me to go." And it was hard, right? But it was necessary, and it was God's plan, and so we did it. And I really learned by that, along with being servants, we're stewards. And anything that I have, I don't own. My
Mm.
family, I don't own them, right? My wife, I don't own her. I'm a
Mhm.
steward. I'm a steward of finance. I'm a steward of ministry. I'm a steward, even as a leader, I'm a steward of all the people that I'm serving and leading. And so we have to always be willing to give something back. And that's what Nehemiah was willing to do. He was willing to commit that he would go and do this. I think after 12 years of governing or something, he came back to the king, and ultimately he was able to go back. But he didn't know that when he came back to the king. He didn't know he was going to go back, right? He didn't know. And so he was just willing to not make it his kingdom that he established here on earth. And that's ultimate leadership.
Yeah, that's a great example, and I love it for 2 reasons. One, because, that is a great story, and Nehemiah is a great leader and gives us good example, and I love it also because that was not on my list at all, so it was a leader I wasn't even I wasn't even thinking about, so thanks for adding value to me, with that story. I had 4 on my list for different reasons. I couldn't narrow it down to just 1. I put Moses because he was called, he was faithful, and he faced a lot of opposition as he led, not only from the Egyptians, but even from his own people. I put Joseph because of his character and ultimately because of his forgiveness. You mentioned empathy. He definitely showed empathy and caring for his own brothers who did him wrong. And in the way he chose to, forgive them and still, support and help them when he didn't have to. Joshua, I put Joshua down because of his execution ability, how he executed on Moses's vision when once Moses was gone, for his courage. When he went into the land as a spy and came back and said, "Yeah, we could take the land," right before they had to wander for 40 years, and for his decisiveness. For me and my house, we will serve the Lord, and I know that's my brother PJ's, one of his favorite verses in the Bible, and Joseph is his favorite. Biblical character for that reason because of his decisiveness on not only serving the Lord but leading his family in serving the Lord. And then lastly, I put Jesus, obviously, because he's the ultimate servant leader who not only is a leader, a transformation leader, which is something I seek to be because he transforms people's lives and transforms people's hearts, but he also did such a great job of creating other leaders. I mean, Jesus created leaders who were so bought in that they died, for what they believed and for what they saw in him. So, and not just those people who walked, with him while he was here on this earth, but even lots of people who didn't ever get to meet Jesus in person, were such, followers and became such leaders themselves that, they were willing to die and are still dying in places in this world for their faith. And so to me, ultimately, it's that, ability that Jesus had to create other leaders that makes him stand out for me. So for me, it's those 4. It's Moses, Joseph, Joshua, and Jesus for various different reasons.
I gotta say something to because just because when you're talking about Jesus, it really struck me. It's actually kind of a pet peeve of mine. Not Jesus, what I'm about to say. That as leaders, the one thing you talk about Jesus is great because he also knew that some of his disciples were going to fail, and he
Mhm.
chose them anyways. He
Right.
knew that Peter was going to deny him, and he chose him anyways. He knew he was going to deny him, and he still affirmed him that he would be the rock for the church is built on. And he knew that he was going to fail. And so many times in life, let's just say I've been in leadership for 20 plus years, whatever it is, I'll be in conversations where we'll be talking about other people in the organization, maybe want to not always, sometimes promote, sometimes move, sometimes offer different responsibilities. And so many times we get stuck in these conversations about their shortcomings. I mean, it's everywhere. It's in the church. It's in it's everywhere. You get stuck talking about their shortcomings, and I'm like, and I said this more recently. I said, so if they were an outside candidate who wanted this position and we knew nothing about them, we wouldn't care. We wouldn't care about those shortcomings. We wouldn't know,
Yes.
and anything
Yes.
anyone can get through an interview or two, right?
Yep.
And yet this person, because they've been with us for X amount of time, let's just say 10 years, and they've been faithful for 9 years and 11 months and 24 days, but those 6 days, right, they had bad days or whatever. It's like, we're going to disqualify them because we know that. And I'm like, that's not right. Unless
Yeah.
we're talking about serious moral failure, of course, or something that endangers people,
Right.
obviously that, but just in general, it's usually not to that extreme. It's just
Right.
that we know that they're not perfect and they made a mistake or they lost their temper or they went off on somebody and so they're disqualified. And I'm like,
Yeah.
where's the grace to grow? Is we
Yeah.
have to have grace to grow. People need to give me grace, and they do, right? And then I find myself in sometimes other situations trying to be with a group of people saying, let's give a little bit of grace for growth here, you know? And so when you said Jesus, you were talking about, I said, yeah. And he knew that they were going to betray him and he chose them and he affirmed them anyways. Love
Yep.
that.
Yeah, you're 100% right, and, it sounds like you are talking, if without making any assumptions, well, I'm gonna make an assumption. You're talking from an HR perspective because I was in the HR world for that long, and I seen exactly exactly what you were talking about, I would say on steroids compared to any other role that I had, where we had these kind of performance and, like, development type of conversations about people. For those of you who are listening who maybe have never been like in a management role, there's something called a nine blocker that management and HR teams use to kind of place people and rank people on a chart that basically determines whether they are ready to move on to the next position or if they're good in their role or if they're still learning their role. And yeah, I've been part of those conversations as well where I was very blown away at how much focus was on the shortcomings instead of the potential. Because again, another Maxwell principle is for us to grow, we have the law of the rubber band. We have to be willing to
Mhm.
stretch ourselves, and we have to be willing to allow the people who are under our authority or our leadership to be able to grow and stretch themselves and delegate to them and let them go and take challenging assignments where yes they may fail, and we have to support them so that they don't fail, or at least if they do fail, they don't fail too hard and it's not catastrophic. But we have to allow people the room to fail. I could tell you that that's one thing that I've communicated personally to every leader that I've ever worked for is I need room to fail. I need you to give me enough room to fail. And that is something that I think a lot of leaders struggle with.
Yeah, I think it's called failing forward
Yeah,
as well. Yeah.
failing
No, yeah,
forward. Yeah,
spot on.
100%. So let me ask you this. So we talked about growing a little bit. Michael, what is one way that you are growing as a leader?
Yeah, this is of everything we're talking about today, this is probably the one that took the most thought and consideration. There are a lot of ways that I'm growing all the time, but and I'm a transparent person. I think you'll see that over a while, but it's discipline for sure. The way that I'm growing right now is I'm growing in discipline because I am that jump now think later kind of leader, and that's why that learn apply teach strikes me so hard because I am that. Let's go, I'm ready. I heard half the instructions and I'm out. You think of that, was it Family Feud, where people hear half of the question and they hit the buzzer, and Steve Harvey's just smiling like, you don't even know I'm going to ask it. That's me. And so, I have had to learn to slow down. I have had to learn to apply things in my life first. I have had to learn through some painful missteps. And so, discipline for me, I'm a person who my wife would say she kind of gets a little upset sometimes because I'm a person who comes to life in a crowd. I just do. It could be a party, it could be on stage, it could be I could be speaking or whatever. If I'm in the back of a conference, you won't even know I'm there. But if for some reason if I'm up on the stage, I'm everywhere. I'm a huge personality in that sense. But I do that, but then what I found is that whenever I'm not in that limelight, or whenever I'm not, in that situation, I lack discipline. And suddenly I'll go 3 or 4 days, I didn't read anything. And
Mm,
imagine, and I've talked about this before, being a missionary and a pastor, and at times, different times in my life, just not even opening the Bible for a few days. And it's just like, no, it's a daily thing. Maxwell obviously talks about this, right? Every day he reads, every day he writes, every day he files. He says that in about half of his books, probably every day he reads, every day he writes. And it's the discipline though. It's being disciplined. And it's really a principled thing. If I believe I need to be a lifelong learner, which I do, I believe we should all be lifelong learners because we're never going to learn everything this side of eternity. Then I have to be disciplined to do it every day. And so the weird thing is the way I'm growing in my leadership right now is the ability to put on the brakes a little bit and to think things through and to, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Mm,
And so I'm
yep.
I'm learning how to slow down and include other people in the process, which I hate sometimes. I just want to go. Do we have to have 7 conversations about this, right?
Yep.
Yes, you do, because that's leadership, because that is
Mm.
investing in others, because that is getting the buy-in, right? The law of the buy-in. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm in a season of learning to discipline, to slow down, to be thoughtful every day in how I grow, and to bring others along in the journey a little bit more thoughtfully.
Yeah, I love that quote you just said. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to, how did it
Yeah.
go? If you want to go
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you have to
You
go
wanna go
together.
far, go together. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, 'cause it will and going together will slow you down because you can't just grab your keys and run out the door. You gotta wait for someone else to put on their coats and, get on their shoes and get there with you, like you said, that is definitely, part of leadership. Yeah, I've heard that quote before, and I'm glad you brought that up because that is a good quote for us to reflect on, because, yeah, I mean, as leaders, we have to know the way, go the way, and show the way, but we got to look back and make sure that other people are going too, and we're not just going alone. Otherwise, we're not leading anyone. We're just leading ourselves. For me, I talked about it a little bit earlier. For me, the biggest thing I'm doing right now at this stage of my life to grow is just trying to connect with others. I'm a transplant to Missouri. We've been here for uh, going on 8 years now, and most of the people I've connected with at this point was through work, through my last job. And, I was in a role where I did have the ability to connect with a lot of people just kind of inherently. I didn't really have to go out of my way to do so. It was just part of my job. Now that I've started my own company and I'm no longer, at my previous job, it's a lot more, I feel a lot more isolated, and it's a lot more, even too much for me as an introverted person to be alone this much or be with just a small group of people, mostly my family this much. I need to connect with people. I need to connect with people for my own sanity. I need to connect with people to share my faith. I need to connect with people to grow my business. So for me, that is really what I'm trying to do to grow as a person. And what we mean by growth, for anyone who might be listening and thinking, what do these guys mean? They keep talking about growth. Growth is really all about just trying to be the best version of you that you could be. It's trying to reach your full potential. And I know that for me to be my best version of me and for me to reach my full potential, I have to connect with more people. As much as I would love to just go sit in the basement and play a video game, you know,
You
I
connect with
gotta
people sometimes on video
I
games.
yeah, yeah, not the games I play,
Yeah.
but yeah, so some people do, some people do connect through video games.
Okay.
I know my kids, they play these games that, they co-op with their friends, and they're talking to each other in their rooms, and they don't even see their friends in person as much because they're on the phone with them, or, talking to them through the internet.
Hmm.
Not the games I play, but, yeah, so it's been a stretch for me, and it is stretching me, and it is growing me to get out there and connect with more people, just trying to remember people's names and where I met them. I'll go to one networking event and I'll see someone I met at another place, and I'm like, "Uh-oh, I wasn't expecting this." And, setting up one-on-one time with people to, go grab coffee or go grab, lunch, and just getting to know somebody else, whether or not they could help me in my business, or whether it's just me getting to know them so I can help them with theirs. I've been really trying to connect more with others. That's been the number one thing. And for people who do know me well, they know that that is a stretch because I'm kind of like you in a way, Mike. Like, I once upon a time, I used to do Christian hip hop. I used to be a rapper, and I used to love to be on stage, and I used to love to rap. And now I've done tons of speaking and training over the last 20 years in my job and in school. And I like doing that. But when I'm in the crowd, like, I sit in the back row or like off to the side because I don't want to be in the middle. I get anxious when I'm around too many people. If I feel too claustrophobic, if the room is not big enough and people are like on top of each other and I could hear everyone their side conversations, I get very anxious in that setting. So it is me really stretching myself and trying to grow as a person.
Absolutely.
Okay, so last question, and this is the takeaway. So of everything that we've talked about today, we've talked about lots of biblical principles, lots of teachings of John Maxwell, different leaders that show up in the Bible that teach us different things about leadership. But if there's just one message for leaders out there, so anyone who is actually a leader, whether they have a formal title or whether they are just out there just doing the work, if there was one message that you want them to take away from this discussion, what would it be?
Yeah. Is it all right if I give two? I got to give two. All right.
Absolutely.
Sorry. The first one, because the first one we've already talked about, I just want to reiterate change is inevitable, growth is optional. And that,
Mm,
I think that's kind of the crux of even this podcast today is everything changes. And my oldest son just got married about a month ago. Then I have a sophomore and a freshman, and everything is constantly changing. And I can't stop the world from changing around me. Yeah, nor am I supposed to. But whether or not I grow in this season, whether or not I grow, personally, if I develop myself or not, that I can control. And so, that's one thing. Change is inevitable, growth is optional. But the other thing I was going to say is that just one of my four words that we use, and it's that flexible is too rigid, and I hate that. I Flexible is too rigid. So I'm a person who sometimes, I like that I know what's going to happen in a day. I like that I wake up this time, I do this, and once again, in the season of life I'm in, because my oldest son just got married and moved out. Well, he did everything with my other two kids. He took them to school, he took them to this, he picked them up from practice. I really didn't know everything he did, right? And so
mm,
now that he's not here, and suddenly, well, Dad, I got to be here. Dad, I got to be picked up here. Dad, my practice gets on at 10 p.m. Who's keeping freshmen till 10 p.m. at night, right? But anyways, everything that I had my whole life is kind of upended that way, and I'm having to learn again what it means to be flexible. And in this
mm,
life, as leaders, as Christ followers, for me, as husbands, as a father, it's detrimental for me to get stuck in a certain pattern or way and think that everyone else needs to conform to me. That's just not life. We're talking about servanthood. We're talking about stewardship. We're talking about recognizing the patterns that are around us in the world and society and our community. Our community has patterns and things that we need to pick up on. And if we're not flexible, if we're not willing to allow different unplanned events and things like that to come into our life, we're going to miss it. And, the thing that bothers me as leaders, when I miss it, there's one thing where maybe it affects me because I missed something. But what about the people I was supposed to reach out to? What about the
right.
people I was supposed to have an impact on their life? I was supposed to influence. I was supposed to help them in this season. I can miss that too. Flexible sometimes. Flexible is too rigid. You got to be super flex.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I think the for me the two things is, and I'm gonna follow your example and go with two because one we've
Yes,
already talked about, which is the first is you got to keep growing. If you are a leader of a church, of a business, of an organization, of a family, of a softball team, whatever it is, you got to make sure that you're continuing to grow. And the second thing is, and it's very similar, is lead yourself first. It's the hardest. It's the hardest. You are the hardest person to lead. But if you can do that, then you can do anything. So focus on growth, focus on continuing to grow and reach your potential and make sure you are doing a good job of leading yourself first. So
that's good.
that's my two.
That's good. I like that.
All right. Anything else that you would add before we wrap up this episode?
No, I just appreciate you. I appreciate meeting you and being invited today. And I hope it's the beginning of something more. I haven't met your brother, but I watched your podcast, of course, and I really think he's cool too. So, I just like what God's doing around us. He's always doing things around us. I just feel like we miss it so many times because I've passed posts on Facebook 100 times when someone said, "Do you want to meet?" And for some reason, this time I was feel compelled to respond. And it's just, we just got to be willing sometimes to step out of our comfort zone, to not be complacent. And I just, I appreciate his conversation. I knew that an hour would be nothing for us just because of the first time we met. I mean, it's just, we'll just talk and it'll go by. So I just appreciate you willing to give me this space, even though we just met, and that takes trust. And I just enjoyed it. Thanks.
Well, I super appreciate you being flexible and being able to join me today. As I mentioned earlier, my brother's out there doing the Lord's work of making sure everyone has power. So we should be he should be back for the next episode. But I do really appreciate you stepping in, kind of at the last minute here, as to have this conversation. And I think it's a good conversation, and it follows up well with our last episode where we were talking about fatherhood, because I think, fatherhood and leadership are two things that go hand in hand. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. And for everybody else, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. That does it for this episode of Walk Talk. So, thank you so much. And if you haven't already, please follow the show. And before you go, leave your favorite verse in the comments below. God bless.